All right, so today we're going to deep dive into something pretty heavy that I think a lot of folks listening can relate to.
Absolutely.
It's this idea that for minority groups here in the U.S. assimilation can be this real double bind where you're getting it from both sides. Like you're trying to fit into the larger culture, but then you're also getting criticism from your own community for maybe like selling out or losing your roots.
Absolutely. And, the sources we've got for this deep dive really lay out why this is such a tricky situation. And I think it raises some really interesting questions about identity and, what it means to belong in a diverse society like ours.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. Starting with
Let's do it.
the criticisms that come from within the community itself.
Okay.
Why do you think that happens?
Well, a lot of it boils down to cultural preservation. When you have communities with these strong traditions, their own languages, values, all these unique cultural markers, maintaining those things becomes really important, especially when they're facing pressure to conform to that dominant culture. So assimilation in that context can feel like you're abandoning.
Like a betrayal almost.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're turning your back on your heritage. And it's not just about, like holding on to the old ways for tradition's sake. It's often a way of pushing back against feeling erased.
Oh, I see.
By the dominant culture. It's about maintaining that sense of identity and shared history, which can be so crucial for a community's well-being.
Yeah, and one of the sources even mentioned the example of some Black immigrants who might resist fully assimilating. Because they don't want to be lumped in with the historical experiences of African Americans in this country.
Absolutely.
And the discrimination that comes with that.
And that speaks to this idea of trying to carve out your own unique space within this larger society.
And then you also have these different generational perspectives at play, right?
Of course.
Like younger generations might be quicker to adopt American norms.
Oh, yeah, they're growing up in it.
Right. While older generations might hold more tightly to those traditional ways.
Absolutely. And that can lead to some real tension within families and communities.
Yeah, for sure.
Trying to bridge those different perspectives.
Right. And then there's also this fear that if individuals assimilate too much, their loyalty to the community might waver.
Exactly. Like they might prioritize fitting in with the mainstream over standing in solidarity with their own group. It's a complex dynamic for sure.
Okay, so let's flip it for a second and talk about what happens when people from minority groups do assimilate.
Okay.
They're trying to fit in. Be accepted by the dominant culture. Does that actually work?
Well, that's the thing, Assimilation doesn't automatically erase prejudice or guarantee acceptance.
Yeah, the sources are very clear about that.
Unfortunately.
Like you still see all those racial stereotypes persisting no matter how American someone might seem.
It's really disheartening.
Yeah, think about that whole perpetual foreigner concept.
Oh, yeah.
Where people of color, even if they were born and raised here, are still seen as outsiders.
Exactly, like they don't truly belong. It's this really insidious form of othering.
And it's like a double standard too, right?
Oh, it totally is.
Like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Exactly, you get criticized for not fitting in, for holding on to your heritage. But then if you do try to fit in, you're accused of losing your authenticity or like trying too hard to be something you're not.
It's such a tough spot to be in.
It really is.
And on top of all that, even when people do assimilate, those systemic barriers, those inequalities, they often remain in place.
Like they never went away. The sources even brought up the example of Japanese Americans in the 20th century. Who, despite their efforts to integrate into American society, still faced discrimination. And were unjustly interned during World War II.
Exactly. A really dark chapter in our history.
Yeah, and those barriers still exist today.
They absolutely do.
In different forms, of course. But the impact is very real. Things like discriminatory hiring practices, limited access to quality education or healthcare.
Absolutely.
These things don't magically disappear just because someone assimilates.
And that's what makes this whole conversation so important. We have to acknowledge these systemic issues that are at play here.
So when you're constantly facing this push and pull, this criticism from both sides, it obviously takes a toll on individuals. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
like psychologically,
for sure,
it can be really damaging.
Yeah.
You know,
what are you seeing in the sources?
Well, they really highlight the internal conflict and the sense of not belonging that assimilated individuals often experience, especially for second-generation immigrants who are navigating these two different cultural worlds. It's like they're constantly trying to reconcile their family's heritage with their American identity.
And that can be so stressful.
Oh, it absolutely can.
Leading to things like anxiety, depression, all those mental health challenges.
Exactly. And the sources even talk about how this pressure to assimilate can actually hinder personal growth and self-discovery.
Yeah, because you're so focused on fitting in.
Right. You're not really exploring who you are as an individual outside of these societal expectations.
Okay, so zooming out a bit. What does all this say about our society as a whole?
Well, for me, it really underscores the fact that
we still have these deep-seated racial hierarchies in the U.S.
Yeah.
The fact that assimilation doesn't equal full acceptance really highlights how powerful and persistent those hierarchies can be.
Like, it's not just about individual attitude.
Right. It's woven into the very fabric of our institutions and systems.
And there's this tension, too.
Oh, yeah.
Between the ideals of multiculturalism, right? Like celebrating diversity.
Right.
And this pressure to conform to a dominant norm.
It's like this ongoing struggle to balance those two things.
Okay, so let's bring it all home for everyone listening.
Right.
What we've seen here is that assimilation for minorities in the U.S. is really complicated.
It is.
It's not a simple path to acceptance,
right?
But it can actually lead to criticism from both sides.
Exactly.
You know, within your own community,
right?
From maybe abandoning your heritage and from the dominant culture,
right?
Despite your efforts to fit in.
It's a real catch-22.
So this idea of like what it means to belong, and how you navigate your identity, in a diverse society. Those are huge questions.
That are huge questions.
That we're still grappling with.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I think the sources we look at today really challenge us.
They do.
To think about how we can create a more inclusive society.
Right.
Where people aren't forced to choose between their heritage and their American identity.
You know, it's about creating spaces where people feel like they can fully belong without having to sacrifice who they are.
Without having to erase parts of themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a really powerful thought to leave everyone with.
I think so.
So I'll turn it over to you all listening now.
Yeah, what do you think?
You know, how do we move towards that kind of society?
How do we create that sense of belonging for everyone?
Yeah, where diversity is truly valued and celebrated.
Right.
All right. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a great conversation.
We'll see you next time.
See ya.